make this accessible to others as well, right? A lot of people have to deal in dark rooms with fluorescent samples. That's why we decided to have a dark interface. If you prefer the light version of it, you can switch to the light interface, which looks like this for any transparent and color images like this. It would be fine. Maybe not so good if we have to sit in the dark room acquiring fluorescence images. Okay, the system which is close to me comes with a color camera and a black and white camera. And in the next minute, I will show you how to operate the color camera, how to acquire images in color mode. Then we will switch over to the black and white camera, and we'll do nearly the same with this black and white camera and have a fluorescent sample handy. Okay, I try to explain the functions and options you will definitely need, and I focus on the ones which really help to streamline your workflow, and maybe some of the options which will be available I have to skip due to time reasons. Okay, so ZEN is already up and running. I do have the color camera as the active one, and this here is a motorized system. So we see transmitted light is already available all the way through to our color camera. So we should be able to acquire the first image and to set up the first parameters for this first image. Okay, so let's start with live. And this is already now my live image, which helps to maybe focus, to find the best position we want to look at, and stuff like this. For the very first live image and the first session that morning, we have to do something like setting a proper exposure time, maybe checking out the white balance and stuff like this. So let's do this again with a live. We do have the option to press this here, which is set exposure. This is an automated exposure giving us something like 1.011 milliseconds, which has to do with the intensity I apply over the transmitted light carrier and the lamp on my sample. Okay, so looks already good, and we might already proceed and take the first snap. Okay, let's do this. If I hit the snap button, I get a snap, and despite or other than the live image, which can't be stored and saved, this snapped image now can be saved and exported and can be taken for further analysis. And yeah, so that's really a photo, if you like. And the live only helps to adjust things. Let's switch on live again and check out what we should look at. So this here is a histological staining. We do see a lot of colors, and the color camera has the specific that it works as an RGB device. So at the very bottom of our image, we see this histogram, and we see there a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. So what we can see here has really to do with the intensity and the colors in our image, in our live image at the very moment. So if I move this a bit, no sample anymore, looks different. If I move it back into this position here, we clearly see we properly have distributed RGB gray values over that image. And to get a better understanding what this histogram is all about, we must know that we really display the intensities from very black intensity or intensity of 0, which never exists in our samples. So it's 0 up to, with this special camera, we do have 256 gray values. So the brightest spot would be 255. And we can see evenly distributed all the intensities. Since we hit the set exposure button, I can be quite sure that the image is never overexposed, it's not too dark, and everything is fine. So this is a little bit like if you open the camera on your smartphone, it would automatically start and setting an exposure which is appropriate to whatever you want to take a photo of. Okay. Last but not least, with a color camera, we do have to do something about the proper display of this image, which has to do with gamma and maybe black and white settings or min-max settings, which has to do with the way of displaying this image, displaying over a certain projector on your laptop or somewhere, but does not have to do with the image intensities. So we do not change any values of your image. Okay, and color camera mostly refers to a gamma which is below 1.0 to make sure we do have a very, or the contrast of the image we're looking at is pretty much the same like what we would see using the eyepieces and using the microscope. This has to do with the settings of our displays. So monitors are mostly set up to 6,000 or 9,000 Kelvin, and they are made to do whatever emails or something and have a white background and black whatever types on it. And for images like this, we have to adjust this a bit. Okay, so this gamma of 0.45 is good for color images. And if you want to have the image a little bit crisper, you might check this min-max or best fit option, and then it's giving you a little bit more contrast. It's up to you what you want to do. Okay, but you will never access the image data. We always do this in terms of adjusting the display. Okay, what else? With a sample like this, we want to make sure to have a very decent, very white background because there is no staining in this position here. There is no color to be expected. So that's why we have the option of this white balance, white kind of a white reference. Your smartphone is doing this all the time. But here, as you can already see, this sample is showing more red than green and blue, so maybe it's worth to set a kind of a white balance. There are several options. Auto would do this in an automated way, and if you like, you can even pick a certain pixel and tell this pixel to show up white, and then you should have a proper distribution of your 3 RGB channels, and they are matching in terms of intensity. Okay, and one more thing, what we can already see here, I'm using a 10x lens at the moment, and maybe I did not set proper color illumination, which I should do definitely. There are options like setting a so-called shading correction, which gives us a very homogeneous, very even background. To do so, we might go into a position like this where we don't have any sample. We might want to defocus, and then we hit this define shading correction button, and then everything is quite even at the end, and we might want to move back into our sample. And this way we make sure we, after whatever grabbing those images, we have a very proper background and not such a very disturbing and worrying shading. just keep in mind this has to do with the image or with the microscope setup I'm using right now. If I would switch into the 5x or 20x, if I would change the condenser position to phase contrast or something, I would have to do this again to make sure then with the new setting of my microscope, the shading correction is the proper one. Okay, everything is fine and we can now do a snap like this again. Okay, what is the thing you're doing mostly next? You want to save this image and maybe you want to have a certain information about scaling. You want to do some measurements or stuff like this. So down here you see there's an option which would introduce a scale bar. So now we know what we see here is something in the range of 100 micrometers. You can set this scale bar according to your wishes like this. You can right click and edit this and give it a certain whatever color and naming and stuff like this, up to you, whatever you like, okay? So now I've set it to black and maybe it helps. Okay, talking about saving that image, if you would plainly save this image, you would stay with the call size image format, which is a generic format, which allows us to handle lots of different things over a session, like Z positions, like positions in our samples, like different channels. If we talk about multi-channel fluorescent images, it allows to cope with time series and everything. And we somehow handle in the back raw data. So we never process automatically our data. You can be sure you can trust your data. So best is always to keep your CZI file, as we can see here. It's a certain file format. And whenever you want to reopen that image, you are quite sure you're looking and you're facing your raw data. Okay. No problem to export those data for your presentation, for your paper or whatever, but just to play safe, best to keep the raw data as well. Okay, if you want to save this, just save this as a call size image file and no more requirements needed. You just save it and give it a certain name. If you want to export your image, there are lots of options. I just pick one, which is the export option, which allows to have fully control over what we're going to do with this export. So this switches automatically into this processing tab. And as we can see here, if I would hit apply, I would end up with a JPEG. And very important, burn-in annotations will allow to have a JPEG at the end, which consists of the image and the scale bar as well. And I only have to tell where to save this, and here we go. And let's check whether I did it right. That's the last one. Okay, as we can see here, scale bar is in, and this now is something as a regular JPEG, no longer the ZEISS ZEN platform needed. Okay, what else? I easily introduced this scale bar. As a prerequisite, we need to have a proper scaling of our microscope and the hardware devices we have in use. I'm the lucky one operating a motorized setup. So on the lower left, I have access to something which allows me to control the scaling. So what I see here is it's done automatically. So whenever I switch lenses, I will get the proper scaling according to what hardware we have in use. And we see here that each single pixel of my image represents something like 0.35 microns. I do have a 10x objective in use, no further magnification. It's this type of camera with this type of pixel pitch, and the camera adapter is set to 0.63. So everything is fine. If your system is not a coded one, if it's not a motorized one, you can pick the lens and pick the camera adapter, and then you get the same. And if you choose the proper scaling, you can be sure to always have the proper scaling in your image and to allow all kinds of measurements. Still having the call size image file open, and we already talked about there are a lot of tools which allow to access your image. I will pick out for now this info tab, which gives you all the information which has to do with the acquisition. So this is still a thumbnail of your image, and down here we exactly see all the data which might be of interest. If you want to come back to this and tell your supervisor how you did this and what was the exposure time, what was the scaling, and what kind of setting you had in use. Yeah, sorry.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. This is Ruth. I just saw there was a question. Maybe it would be good just to answer right away. One of our participants missed how you selected the scaling window. I think that was just recent.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So lower left, very low at the left, I have access to the scaling. Yeah. You see? Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Welcome. Okay. So let's close this again. We played safe. We do have the proper scaling. We can do measurements like this. All right. So far with the color camera. And next thing I want to do is switch to fluorescent sample and do roughly the same with a black and white camera. Yeah, years back, the moment the first digital cameras were available, it was mostly a color camera, and people had to use a color camera for even fluorescent and deep samples. In our days, we are the happy ones. Color cameras are very good at imaging stuff like this, and whenever possible, we should go with a black and white camera if we have to deal with fluorescent samples. Okay, so let's switch the sample and switch the camera. So here it's another model of the Axocam series. And just give me a second to put a sample in. Maybe I should switch into higher magnification and start with some live image. Okay. Just to make sure we have everything in focus and everything is right to go, I quickly check by eye. And it looks quite okay. I already have my sample in place, and we can proceed with live and now with the black and white camera. So as we can already see here, there are more options coming with this except the white balance, because this now is a camera which does not give us RGB channels, but just black and white intensities. So it's intensities only. If we look here down at the histogram, we do see again 0, and the brightest spot would be in the range of 16,000 something. So this is showing me that this is a 14-bit camera. The more dynamic a camera is able to deliver, the better. We can look at very, very bright spots the same time as we can look at very, very dim spots. So just if you consider nerve tissue, sometimes the body of your nerve cell is very, very bright, but the synapses and the axons are quite dim. So to have everything properly displayed in a single snap, it's good to have this huge dynamic, and this allows us a lot of things we will talk about and see in the next minutes. Okay, for sure we can start with this set exposure again, which would do a single measurement, and as we can see here, something like 185 milliseconds would be suggested. Why this? Down here we do see something which is set to 50%, which means whenever I hit this set exposure button, I will give half of the optimum, so to say. Yeah. So it's reducing the real exposure time to half of what the camera would be able to do. So if I would set this to 100% and hit this button again, we would get something in the range of 400 microseconds, and still not overexposed, but I'm very close to saturating the first pixels. And please, guys, have in mind, if I do everything perfect here, and I go into the next position, the next cell might be brighter because we did not apply light so far, and whatever shows more staining or something. So it's always best to prevent saturation, to do something like 70, 80 or something percent, and reduce the exposure and still have an image which gives you all the detailed information and lots of gray values. Okay, let's do a snap. Okay, so right now we already could see the snap looks much better than the image we did, or the live image we had to face before. So this is giving us much better contrast, much darker background, brighter intensities here. Again, we might want to adjust this a bit and hit this best fit button, because we already know we do not alter the intensities but just the display. So how is this with this very crisp image and maybe the little bit grayish live image here? If we look at the exposure time of 288 milliseconds, this would be the real exposure time for the snap we are going to do at the end. If we look down here at the bottom, we see a frame rate of something like 6 to 7 frames. So the cameras are set always the way that they allow to do high frame rates and fast refreshing in live, which with 300 milliseconds would allow us only to deal with 3 frames in the live mode. To overcome this, the live image is always reduced in dynamic and exposure time, and a little bit enhanced to what we're going to do with the live image is more or less setting parameters, focusing, and then we hit the snap.
Sorry, it's Ruth again. We just got 2 questions again from persons that missed how to change from color camera to black and white, or the way around. Can you maybe just show it again? Sorry.
Sure. Okay. So down here, but this is only true if I have 2 of them, right? So it's a drop-down menu which allows me to switch from the color camera, which is the Axocam 105 in my case, to the 702, which is the black and white model. Yeah? Okay, sorry for, maybe it was a little bit too quick.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, welcome.
Okay, sorry, just another participant asked if it is possible to make the pointer bigger, but I don't think that's possible.
No.
No, yeah, absolutely. We're sorry.
Move this a little bit slower. Yeah, thanks for mentioning this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so some of you might get worried why we do see mitochondria which are stained with a RGB label, with a RFP label, are shown in white only. So with a black and white camera, which gives us intensities only, meaning this kind of camera is colorblind, we can overlay pseudo colors. And from here, I can pick a pseudo color according to what I like and according to what is best. And now it's the way we are looking at, if we really look into the microscope over the eyepieces, applying a certain filter and a certain LED or something, right? So the black and white allows us to pseudo color the image, and as we will see later in the multi-channel mode, we do have options to switch on and off the colors to maybe see faintest details much better than before. Okay, some basic stuff about exposure time and what is best. If your sample is a fixed one, if you do have a fixed brain section with multiple stainings or something like this, feel free to adjust the exposure time the way that you make use of most of the dynamic of your camera, which means this 70% of the dynamic range is fine. In our case, it would be something like 288 milliseconds. Everything is fine. If we talk later about live cell imaging, we have to count in that our sample will get light a lot over different time points, maybe different Z positions and different channels. So just to make sure we do not harm our sample too much and the sample is still happy after hours of imaging, feel free to reduce the exposure time. And I'll show you that this is doable and you still get the data you might want to need. So having the live on again and checking out this live image with this 200 something. What would happen if I reduce this down to something like 100 milliseconds, which definitely is right dim and dark. So let's do a snap and check out this snap now. As we can see here, we have reduced data, reduced intensities, but as I can feel free to adjust the display settings, I would say at the end, this image tells me the same story like this one, which needed 3 times the exposure time of this one, okay? So whenever needed, whenever we have to protect our sample, talking about live samples, reduce the exposure time to the minimum which is required to still get decent image quality. Okay, let's do this further down. Let's say we go with something like 50 milliseconds and acquire another snap. It's quite dim. We don't see much except we adjust this again. Yeah, quick access to this display setting is best fit. All right. So which tells me instead of this 300 milliseconds, I can easily live with 50 milliseconds and still get an image, okay? And one more option I like to point out is this binning here. I already had binning of 2x2 in use. What does this mean? This means my camera, which is a 2 megapixel camera, already was used in a mode where 2x2 neighboring pixels show up at the end as a single one. This makes my device much more sensitive and helps to reduce the exposure time a lot. So let's do something without any binning. Exposure time now would require something like a second and more, which is a lot of light and won't definitely help with live samples. Okay, but let's do a snap. Okay, which is a very good snap. And now let's do the same with binning again and set exposure. We can reduce down to this 300 milliseconds. and the content of this image is definitely the same, except we do have a loss in resolution. But we still do see the mitochondria. We see the single objects quite nicely. In this one here, we would have the full resolution, a little bit better, but again, this was about 1 point something second of exposure. Okay, so why not using binning? Why not reducing exposure time to protect our samples? This is always something we have to have in mind whenever we start a session on our microscope and we want to record our samples and images. It's always worth to spend a couple minutes thinking what is really needed at the end. Do I need a time series with tons of time points, or is it fine enough if I have intervals of 10 seconds or 10 minutes or something? Do I always need a super resolved image where I only want to count cell nuclei? So maybe then it's worth to reduce resolution and live with an image which allows to go with short exposure. Whatever I did with the exposure time, and maybe on top of this with the control of my LEDs or my light source, whatever it is, whenever we want to have data we want to quantify at the end, we definitely should make sure that we always use the same settings. So best would be then to start with the brightest samples and adjust everything on the brightest samples to make sure the dim ones will work as well, much better than the other way around. Okay, and so far a quick introduction of the black and white camera, and next I want to switch into the acquisition, which allows me to do multiple things like multi-channel imaging, time series, Z-stacking, multi-positions, and all the stuff which will come in the next sessions. So for now, let's do plain multi-channel image acquisition. So what we can do is we can either, we can always work from top to bottom. That's the good news with ZEN Blue. So whatever we need is always somewhere shown up, and then you can work through yourself through whatever you need down here. So whenever your system is already set up and got properly introduced, you might have already access to something like a template out of a long list of templates of multi-channel settings. And due to the fact that my sample here is showing some DARP, some GFP, and some RFP, I picked this one. So let's check out the live again. Now with the black and white camera, definitely. So the DARP channel looks quite okay. This GFP channel looks okay. And the RFP channel is okay. So as you already could see, I'm the guy who prefers in this acquisition multi-channel mode to activate the auto display button, which allows me to switch between channels quite quickly. And even if they have different exposure, different intensities, I always get the display adjusted. I'm never flying in the dark. Last but not least, it helps a lot if I move my sample and come to a brighter position. I make safe. I always see proper signal. By the way, if your system is a motorized one with the latest versions of the ZEN, whenever live is open, you can hit the control and use the wheel to focus your sample. Yeah, quite easy. And you can adjust the speed. So again, control and the wheel whenever live is open. And you might, if your system comes with a scanning stage, you might do something like this. You double click a certain position and this position gets centered. This helps a lot to streamline your workflow sitting in front of your screen, harming your sample with lots of light and being quick. All right, so whenever this is set, we can do a snap, and in an automated system like this, I do acquire channel by channel in an automated way. So I've set all of the channels, all of the images to min-max or best fit option. And right now we do have the image on a large screen. We should have a look at the histogram again. So we did not fully use the dynamic range, but the image is good. So I especially made sure that the DAPI is not too strong. I did not use too much of the UV LED, which will definitely have an effect on the other flow force. So the blue, as we can see here, is quite dim, but yeah, DAPI is always, and taste is always quite bright. So as we see here, we now, instead of having a single channel image, we do have access to all three of them in an overlay. And we can easily uncheck one of them. If we want to look at only two of them, we can use this single channel option to allow moving through the different channels. Or we can do one thing like, which is mostly used to get a good impression, using the split view or the gallery view. So you do have side-by-side images, and you can discuss this with your buddies and proceed with the next, if you like. Okay, so what if you come up with a new sample and you might not find a template, an experiment setup, which is the one you might need? So let's do this from scratch. You hit this wheel here and you start with a new one. Just give it a name. And it's a 3-channel something. You want to save this and you can reuse it all the time. Smart setup is then the way to proceed. Smart setup allows to tell the system what you want to do at the end. So as we can see here, you can pick the camera, which is the best or the preferred one. So in my case, I would go with a black and white camera. And if there's nothing shown up like here, you just hit the plus and you say, okay, let's do some DAPI. Okay, at the DAPI channel. And we already get something. And maybe the GFP as another one. So there's a list of different GFPs, but they all look pretty much the same. So you can pick the first one. And maybe again the RFP. Whatever you used last, you'll find in this list up here. So you can do this as well. And then you close this. And what you see here is sometimes two options. Depends a bit on the filter configuration you might face on your system. So let's go with the fastest option, which allows to do fast switches from A to B and so on. Okay, having smart setup, we only have to know what stainings we do have in our sample. You can add a bright field channel as well, for instance, phase contrast if you like, in such a setting. The system does know that there are all the filters available and there is a fluorescent lamp, so that's how the system makes sure out of this smart setup everything is set. So whenever we now activate the live, so DAPI is now active and I go with live, I do see the live of this DAPI channel here, right? And you can now just by highlighting the GFP, you can switch into GFP, RFP, and so on. That's the good news. You don't have to shut down live all the time. You can easily switch between the channels and make sure you have the settings the way you need. What settings are we talking about? In my case, I'm using an LED light source. So for the GFP, for instance, we're using the 475 LED, and down here we see 150 milliseconds exposure. That's it. Yeah, and this is different if we talk about the RFP. Then the 590 LED is in use, and again 150 milliseconds. So feel free to edit this or to do as we already did with the color camera, set exposure, which will automatically measure all the 3 channels. As we can see here now, it's now different. And now the snap would be a little bit brighter and look like this. Okay. You might easily edit the pseudo color. So if you don't prefer this light blue, feel free to switch it into a different color and save your experiment for the very next time. To play very safe, you can do the following. Let's look at one of the snaps we did before. Yeah, like this one. That's the one we did without smart setup. So assumingly this is an image I did in my last session, the very last week, feel free to open up that image again and hit the reuse button. And then everything is set, as we can see down here. It changed to exactly the settings I used together with this image. Because as long as we keep and save the call size image file, each of the single images of this 3-channel snap knows exactly what exposure, what scaling, and what lamp intensity was in use, and what filter set. Okay, so just to play safe, reloading this image, hitting the reuse button, and you get exactly the same data and parameters back compared to the last session. Okay, if we now want to export such an image, you can do lots of things. If you prefer to have something like this, to have this kind of view, why not making just a snapshot, which always gives you a new single image now, and you can easily export this image. If you want to have this one as a merged image and 3 single channels as well. So again, we move over to processing and the image export option as we have here. So this is already the image we want to export, and again we see it would be a JPEG or maybe a TIFF, so it's up to you whatever you want. We would have the display curve and the channel color in use like shown here. So we make sure we transport this image one by one into a new file format. And whenever we have annotations like a scale bar or something, it would get burned in. We get a merged one, and we get the full set of dimensions, which means 3 single channel images as well. Yeah. Okay, let's do this and check whether I'm right or not. Okay, so it's this one, I guess. Yeah. Okay, it's the merged one. And where do we get the single channels? Okay, maybe I missed it. Individual channel images. Sorry, let's do it again. Let's do it again. Delete the old one. And right now I should come up with 4 snaps as a JPEG. As we can see here, it's the merged one, it's the blue one, the green one, and so on. Okay. There are lots of more options to do this saving and export and whatever you might want to need. As an outlook on what comes next, I will do one more thing. So always set the parameters for all the single channels first, and then you can feel free to check and pick one of the options showing up here, maybe a Z-stack. So what happens if we want to acquire a Z-stack? We get another option, another drop-down menu, which allows to set the positions we want to acquire with this Z-stack. So best is to apply some light, use the live image, and this is a very flat cell culture. So let's just do a Z-stack like this. Say this is the last one. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the first one. Okay, and now my Z-stack would cover something like 3.6 microns. Interval size would something be like 1 micron. We could set it to optimal, then it would be slightly more. And another option allows me to say whether I want to have all channels per slice versus a full Z-stack per channel. Up to you what you prefer. So no longer snap, but starting an experiment would do the job. Okay. And now acquiring all channels per slice looks like this. Blue, green, red all the time through. Okay, here we go. This is my Z-stack now, and on top of having the 3 channels, I do have Z now, which allows me to play back and forth through these different positions. And with this, having now another dimension introduced into this, we do have plenty more options on the left side here, like just to pick one, this ortho view, which allows to do kind of a projection. This is the regular view. We are looking at a single image. This is a side view here, which makes much more sense if it's a real thick sample. And very down here, we do have the easy way to give some maximum intensity projection. Okay, this would be basically it for starting with ZEN, covering the topics color camera, black and white camera, and giving you the first impression of how to set up a multi-channel experiment, how to acquire multi-channel images, how to reuse those things, and on top of this to introduce a Z-stack. Okay, did we get questions so far? And we still have a couple minutes left to answer them.
Hi Gerd, this is Ruth again. So first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it was very interesting and helpful. And also thank you to everybody for your attention, and also really want to thank you for your questions. Gerd, you didn't see it, but there were really a lot of questions coming in. So I think maybe we will just start to answer them. So I will just start from the top and ask you, Gerd, for all of you, for your info, as we really had a lot of questions coming in. Don't worry if we cannot answer them right now. We will definitely do a personal follow-up, so every question will be answered. Please don't worry. So yeah, Gerd, I would just start and just jump in. The first question, I think this is also a practical one. So the question is, I missed how the help worked. You can pass over the icon and get help, but she couldn't see how you did it. Maybe you can just show it.
Yeah, let's try out whether this here would be the one. Let's see. Okay, so at least this refers to the processing, yeah. So I hit this help button here, and then I clicked into one of the options coming with processing, and you get referred to this image processing functions. Yeah?
Okay, super. Thank you.
Yeah. Most of the, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Do you say it, please?
It's fine.
Okay, next question is, can images be automatically saved?
Yeah, good point. Just to play safe, acquisition allows to do some autosave. Okay, autosave now is checked, and we only have to tell where and what. So my pictures, it would get the name of new, and you could set a certain prefix, and then it would count and give it extensions like new 01, new 02, and so on. And same thing would apply to something like automated image export. So if you check this as well, you could do both in parallel. You would autosave your color size image file, and you could already start exporting them while your session is on the way. Okay?
Okay, super. Thank you. Another question is, is the ZEN Blue software compatible with all ZEISS microscopes? And it was combined with another question. The participant is using AxioVision and wanted to know how to change to ZEN Blue.
Okay, good point. So ZEN Blue is the software which we introduced in 2011, and before, more or less the same job was done by AxioVision. So it's the same, let's say, options and modalities, but a very modern interface, much faster, allowing to get operated on 64-bit and those. So we had something to do with this, and 10 years back we introduced ZEN Blue. So most of the systems can be hooked up to ZEN Blue. It depends a little bit on what kind of microscope stand, what kind of camera. So if it's really old, maybe not. Mm-hmm. If it, out of the 2010s or 11s, yes, we could do this. And talking about compatibility, so it does. It has to fit to the system, right? So whenever we set up a ZEN Blue, it has to talk to the microscope, camera, and everything. Mm-hmm. Right now we have this available for our confocals, LSM 900, LSM 980. We do have this for our box system, Cell Discoverer. We have it for all the compound platforms like the inverted, upright, binoculars. We do have this for lattice light sheet microscopes, but importing data from other setups who might not be operated with ZEN Blue can be easily done. So if it's driven by ZEN Black, it's the same file format, which allows to do analysis on all those across those platforms. Yeah, and the future plan is to extend this world of the ZEN Blue into all kinds of systems and mm-hmm. whatever comes next and so on. Yeah.
Thank you. Super. Next question is, can you compare this software version you just showed to the 3.2 version?
Oh, tricky thing, yeah. It's mostly the same so basically the rule is twice a year we get a new version. And mostly this has to do with getting new hardware introduced. So latest in October 2020, we introduced this artificial intelligence sample finder, AI sample finder. That's why we had to go with 3.4. So the main changes have been due to sample finder, which is just a single button, but a very powerful one. So the basic interface here did not change much. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And as we will see in one of the next sessions, we got some new options coming with processing, like deblurring, like bio apps, which gives us easy access to kind of image analysis. So this is new with 3.4, but the interface we are looking at here for getting images, acquiring images, the same. Yeah. Right? Okay. And 3.0 to 3.4 did not change much, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, so interface basically stays the same, but we have new functionalities and so on.
Yeah, and there's never the need always to have the latest version, except you need some functions and you want to keep your system updated. Yeah. Okay. And we permanently do these kinds of settings in webinars, I guess. So, and we pretty much like to introduce the new stuff to you, and then you might come back to us and see whether it's worth it. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Another question is, what is the difference between live and continuous acquisition?
Yeah, I skipped this.
Because
so
it's complicated to do it right now, or I skipped it in the presentation. Yeah, sorry.
It's fine. I'm still in the presenting mode. Okay.
Yeah, you are.
Okay, so live allows me to quickly work in that live window, quickly move and focus and adjust things. And live is really like something like a video camera would do. You get permanently updated, but with some different settings. So the camera is streamlined a bit in live mode to give us a bright image. The camera is reduced in the number of pixels, and we are using some gain in the background to enhance the image. Let's say we would do some with this very 60 milliseconds exposure. Let's again do 500 milliseconds exposure. The image looks much better, yeah. And live still gives me a quite easy update, and I could move my sample and it really looks like a live image. But having half a second exposure and having 6 or 7 frames per second, this is somehow not matching. So that's what I mentioned. We have shorter exposure in the live mode to allow to go for higher frame rates. And if we would do continuous, it would do and give us an image like the one we will later on acquire. So now it's down to 1.5 frames per second, so much slower. And if I now move my sample, it looks a little bit weird, right? So it's not permanently updated. It's updated 3 times a second. And another difference is if you are in live mode, that's why I mostly use live mode, you can quickly switch between those channels and you get quickly updated, and that's it, and you protect your sample and so on. If you do now the same, having all those channels checked in continuous mode, you would get a permanent update of all the 3 channels, which might be of help, but now it's down to half a frame per second. And this does not help much moving around, and as you see, yeah, it's very slow now, and setting the focus and so on. Yeah? If you want to have a single channel in continuous mode, feel free to uncheck the 2 which are not needed, and then you again faster and you can focus on this single channel. Okay, hope this explains.
Super. So we have one question. Will the computer determine the distance to pixel ratio, or does it need to be done manually? If it has to be done manually, how do you do it?
The pixel ratio. Do we talk about the display of our images, or?
I don't know that, but maybe we will just leave it and follow up this question personally if it is needs a bit more explanation.
If it's about pixel size, I can easily answer this. So depends on my screen, and I can set it to 100%, which means 1 pixel out of my camera represents 1 pixel on this screen here. And if I have it that way, it's different. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think we'll still follow up with the person personally, just to make sure.
Who wanted to know? Okay.
Yeah. So another question is, how do you choose the wavelength for fluorescence?
So I did this over this smart setup.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So let's do it again. Let's again open this smart setup and start from the scratch. So if I want to do a new experiment, a new template, I only have to hit the plus, and then I can either go just for search, like this GFP, or let's say a Psi-5 might be the next one. Yeah. Okay. And I get a list of dyes known to this database. Okay. So if I do it that way, and maybe another GFP, let's see what happens. So all of them are quite similar. Okay. So for now, I only had to pick the dyes and I only had to name them because I'm quite sure these dyes are somehow presenting the okay, sorry, I should do it twice because I know very well what dyes are in use. Okay, I hit this twice, sorry guys. And whenever I say, okay, apply this, the system is pretty much aware of what filters are available and what light source is available. So in my case here, I do have a multi-LED device, this Colibri, which consists of 5, 6, 7 LEDs. And if I use this Psi-5 and the GFP setting, I would have implemented in my template the 640 nanometer LED and the 488 nanometer LED. Yeah. Okay. And the filter. Okay. Sorry, I just not want to do
Is
me.
it now?
Oh, yeah. Okay. 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 Let's do it now. Okay. Okay. Here. And if we look at this here, the Psi-5 now it's set to 630. Sorry, 630, and the GFP to 475, and that's basically it. And if you want to dig deeper, you can feel free to check this imaging setup. And here we do see the channel 2 GFP is using this LED and this kind of filter cube and so on. Yeah.
Super. Thank you, Kel.
Yeah.
So we'll do one last question as we're already over the time, which is basically 2 questions, but for one topic. So it is if you can explain binning further and if binning is only used for live samples or also for fixed samples.
You can feel free to use binning whenever you want. It might help if you talk about brain section, which is quite huge, and you have to scan this fully over 3D using tiling, then the file at the end will be quite huge if you stick to your 12 megapixel camera all the time through. So binning can be of help even with a fixed sample. Binning helps, if you talk about binning again, let's close this here and check this out once again. What does binning really mean? So no binning means this camera, and I'm only talking about the one which I have in use here, is offering me 1920 by 1200 pixels. This is a HD CMOS camera. Binning one by one means no binning. Each single pixel out of the camera would give a pixel in my image here, and then I need a certain exposure time to get exactly that kind of signal. So right now we are using a second exposure, yeah. Okay, and then we get an image like this. Okay, let's do it again. If I use binning 2 by 2, or let's do this 3 by 3, means I still have the camera using all those pixels, but 3 pixels by 3 pixels, which is 9 pixels at the end, always the 9 neighboring pixels are somehow switched together and give me a single pixel in my image, which means it's 9 times the intensity in my image. Yeah. So this helps if I, instead of want to have this 1000 milliseconds, I can now go 1/9. So let's say something like 100 milliseconds, and I do this snap again, and the image looks pretty much the same. Yeah, the intensity is pretty much the same, as you can see here. Yeah, this is binning 3x3, and this one was done with no binning. Okay, and the same intensity in this case here means I used 9 pixels together, 9 times the signal to form a single final pixel in my image. Yeah. If we would zoom in and switch on this interpolation, we will see some pixels which are a little bit larger than the ones here. If I go back to full resolution, it's much smoother, yeah, but took much longer. Okay, and if we look at the file size I talked about, so 5 megabytes versus half a megabyte. Yeah, just step back, wait a second, and discuss what you really need at the end. And if we talk about live samples, definitely binning or reducing exposure time helps a lot to protect your samples and to keep yourselves happy.
Super. I think maybe I can just add on a really last final question, which I think fits right now. And the question is, what would have more impact on the cell's viability, light intensity or exposure time?
Oh, good point. Yeah, not so easy to answer. Yeah. Whenever we have too much light on our samples, we might already run into saturating the fluorophores, which is never good at. So it's sometimes better to reduce intensity and extend the exposure a bit. But yeah, try it out. Yeah, and always reduce as much as possible. And just in case your sample does not look happy after a long session, try to live with the poorest image quality, which still gives you some results, yeah, to make sure that your sample is still under physiological conditions. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a nice ending. Okay, so we already did 15 minutes more. Thank you really very much again, Gerd, for the interesting training. Thank you to all the participants for your attention. I already wrote it in the chat. Please check out. We have again a 60-day free ZEN version. You can request it under zeiss.com/trial-zenblue. I added it in chat. And also next week at the same time, so next Wednesday, June 9th, we have the second part of the introduction to ZenBlue. So please make sure to register if you didn't already register. We still have some free places. So again, thank you very much for your time. Stay safe and have a good day, everybody. Goodbye.